All right, Kirk, what are we talking about today?
We are talking about visibility, network and security visibility, and collecting the right data so we can automate as much of that networking as possible so that networks can run more efficient and effective.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that we completely are focused on in terms of getting the data. Either it's either data at rest or it's data in motion, and oftentimes what we are generally looking for customers that speak to us about what they're doing is simply to have a plan in place to get data to all of these different networking stacks, security stacks, in order to make whatever decision they need to make, or even have a response to something that may happen in a network.
Sure, and then basically you come from the perspective of total visibility, packet brokers that can move the right packets from all layers of the OSI stack to the appropriate tools. How do we get visibility on applications? The ones that really matter, I guess, are probably real-time things where if you don't have a good network connection, it causes a lot of problems.
So I think this is a good way to think of it. What is the one thing that is always going to give you the truth? And that's network data, right? So when you're in IT shop and you have a crash cart and you've got a problem, you're going to get up to the rack and you're going to connect things up, and you're going to want to get some traces if you've got a real problem, right? So you imagine that to be the case when this is a worst case scenario and you've got to respond. You scale that to companies that have 10,000, 20,000, 100,000 employees. You're not going to be the one that's going to take the crash cart, go to the rack, and try to get real-time data, right? So your early detection of any type of problem, be it cybersecurity related incident, or let's say network performance issue, an application error, you're going to want to have some way to get that data really quickly. And that is the part where it gets harder if you do not plan that in your data centers, in your cloud deployments, in your workflows that you're doing, either lift or shift, or if you're actually writing from scratch. So oftentimes, these are the areas where if network visibility was, let's say, an afterthought, it becomes very difficult to get access to data because you've already built everything out without it.
So is that, when you talk about network visibility not being an afterthought, what parts of the architecture do you have to build that in? Do you need like physical probes? Do you need things on the user agent? Do you need things, virtual probes on servers? How do you build that into the design process?
I think you said almost all of what happened. So let's just go through a simple example, right? If you've got an existing data center, you may decide to get access to everything on that rack. So top of rack visibility. So you'd have so you'd have taps and some aggregation devices that help you get access to the north-south traffic on that rack. But what's interesting is a lot of the lateral attacks, let's say for cyber threats that happen, they happen east and west, and you don't get access to that if you monitor the top of rack. So the next step would normally be is to actually plan for having virtual taps that are essentially either running in your VMware environment, your Linux environment. If you've got an AWS or an Outpost, any one of those, you need to make a decision. Am I going to take that risk and look at nothing east and west, or am I going to look at it from a, let's say, sampling standpoint? I'm going to deploy this virtual infrastructure as well that takes copies of everything, or mostly the things that are relevant from all those east-west, and then put it back to aggregation. So you'd have the top of rack for north-south. You might have virtual infrastructure monitoring that you do from that standpoint. And then, as you know, right, we've got all these 15 years of cloud deployments. We've got workloads everywhere, right? Azure, AWS, GCP, even IBM and others, right? Oracle. So then you take a step back and you decide, hey, do I have the same level of data governance that I used to have on my own data center, on the data centers I no longer own at all, and I just run it as a PaaS or an application, right? And generally the answer is no. You don't have access to infrastructure. So there you have to take a much more measured approach on deciding how you're going to monitor that entire network. You will see endless reports, by the way, on servers being up in the cloud. Just by basic reconnaissance, you can see so many vulnerabilities across hundreds and hundreds of servers at companies. These are easy things to fix, but you have to kind of bake that into your mindset, right, when you go to the cloud. So long way to describe, you kind of need to have data because it's your early detection system everywhere, your edge, your data centers, your hybrid workloads, and in pure cloud.
Are you seeing people when they're putting in the monitoring system, the visibility system, are the networking groups and the security groups working together, or are they a lot of times siloed?
I'm smirking here because I don't know how you came to that question there, Kirk, but so I can, let me answer it this way. I think that the silo, I'll call it, there is a silo for the network infrastructure team. This is my asset, this is my responsibility, this is my circle, right? And this makes sense, right? Because they have kind of control and governance of network, because network down is not what you want. So you do not want anyone to touch it, right? So then your cybersecurity, your SecOps teams are, let's say, consumers of data off of that network infrastructure. So to your point, I have seen that more often. I'd say it's like a 90-10 rule, where 90% is like the network team is independent of security team. But what's interesting is the 10%, right? The budget sometimes can come from the security team in the installation of whatever it is, virtual software stacks, taps and packet brokers that need to get data out to some place is funded by the security team. So I think this is the norm, let's say T-5 years ago. And then let's say you fast forward to now, because of work from home, because of large data centers being consolidated, you have to optimize, you have to automate. I feel like that silo is kind of getting softer, the lines between them. They're not collapsed into one, I do not think, but for the most part, I believe they're separate for good reason, because they have very different requirements and expectations, right, of what they need to be doing.
How did they go about putting in, this probably wasn't thought out before the pandemic, but the massive scale of needing the work at home visibility to ensure performance, and it's a shift that's not going away. So what have you seen in the monitoring world shift with that work at home shift? What have they had to do to adapt to that?
All kinds of fun things. So lots of stories I can give you, right? We have solutions that do testing, right? For everybody, like the CASB, SASE vendors, the firewalls, the IPSs, the old VPN concentrators, and modern day way to access things, right, without any VPN whatsoever. So all that said, the work from home, I think what happened is 2020 comes, IT departments get the mandate to get things in place to scale up work from home users. Scale up right away. Shockingly, 2 weeks later, everyone's able to scale up. Amazing.
Right.
2 years later, when they look back, maybe data governance, compliance, auditing, identification, authentication, authorization, two-factor, any one of these areas had to be overlooked in favor of expediency of getting access to the network for those who have to work from home. So like at the time back then, that made sense, right? Access to network was priority, job one.
Right.
So what we're seeing now, right, more than 2 years later, is sort of okay, we did that. Now let's go kind of tie off all the loose ends as far as security goes, because they couldn't do both. Right. That's what we're seeing. So we help, for example, vendors that make these CASB, SASE solutions. Is, let's say, the simplest example is application performance that's delivered on this new medium good, or is it worse than what it was when I did it differently? Very simple question. Is it good? I don't know. I didn't test it. And so now some of those things are coming out where you have to now validate that you have that level of support, right? Quality of service, application delivery performance, and then also worry about, hey, is it buttoned up in terms of security?
So a lot of people end up with this hybrid infrastructure where you have people at home, you have a data center over here, and you get cloud. when you start taking all that data from all these different points, how do you put it back together in the right order to get good visibility into what's going on from both a network and a security perspective?
I think, Kirk, it's a very pointed question, and I think that's the one that the IT departments everywhere struggle with. We work with, I think, over 100 different, what we call technology alliance partners. These are like from Palo Alto, Splunk, Extra Hop, and variety of NDR, MDR players, EDR, the modern day XDR players, data recording platforms, voice over IP monitoring solutions. I could go on and on, right? Why I mentioned that is because in the past, it was simple. The stack, network stack security, really not so difficult. Maybe 10 different ways to do things. Now you've got this massive security mesh of technologies, right? So I think the question remains unanswered because of that, because there used to be a way to do things when you own everything outright.
Right.
Now your question about how do you do it? How do you reconcile? The answer is you don't. You cannot, because what used to run just right in your own colo or your own data center, it doesn't even exist in pure cloud.
Right.
And you can't even, for example, if you used to love getting traffic from everywhere, several terabits of traffic into some of our products, then sending it to a variety of tools, you don't have that flexibility in the cloud. So I think that question is very elusive to the IT departments. That's why I believe you see headlines all the time that the cost of cloud is skyrocketed, and that the C-suites are asking for, hey, let's maintain status quo, but do not increase it, which means the observation is you're wasting money and investments, and I'm sure your assets in the cloud are underutilized.
Right.
So long way to come around to tell you that I think it remains elusive how you can have a holistic view of, are you secure, regardless of if you're hybrid or otherwise.
Right. Yeah, the pendulum goes back and forth all the time. Centralized, decentralized. It's been going on for 30 years. Way back to the mainframe, and then to the PC, and on premise, then to the cloud, and then it just keeps going back and forth. And this is going to solve all the problems, and then it creates other problems. And
it does.
Yeah, so that is a big question. Then you mentioned some of these tools too. So now you've got the CASBs and SD-WAN. Does that cause any challenges with trying to track data also when you start having multiple links and traffic going, on different links for optimization? Because really this is all going back to that whole vision of the future with this intent-based network that automatically configures itself as needed. So
yeah, it's amazing. Really, it just works. You just plug it in and it works. You don't even tell it what to do.
Right.
I think the evolution of SD-WAN, I think it predates me. It's been there for a long time.
Right.
Like 15 years. It didn't make it the first time. It died.
Right.
And it came back. And then it evolved over the last 5 years to have more capabilities, right? So SD-WAN was supposed to be a multi-homing platform. You could do some basic services on it, like routing and then firewall, and I'll see you later. Great stuff. Worked great because it only had 2 functions in its life. Now you add all these other things to it, right? Like I can prioritize your applications if you're browsing to salesforce.com through our CASB or SASE or SD-WAN appliance. If you have one, well, we'll prioritize that better than if you were just going to YouTube, right? Great.
Right.
It's not a bit like black magic.
Right.
But we do see that as a challenge, because that's what I was mentioning earlier. We are asked by customers to validate application delivery performance.
Right.
It used to be simple stuff in data centers, across data centers. Now it is very difficult. We have to actually work with them closely to design solutions that give them access to, like, where do they put all of the ways to test in the DMZ, in a AWS, in a VPC, in what you mentioned earlier, which is like the pendulum has swung, edge sites or your branch offices. Right. Now tell me, if I access these services through these little platforms I've got everywhere, what's the performance like? So I think It's challenging now because we've made so much improvement over time on our x86 architecture. We can run so many things on that, and that everything is now software.
Right.
And as a result, yeah, it's a challenge for making sure that you're kind of you level up and that it stays at that level.
Yeah, that's you know, when you think about the vision, they're trying, you know, the SASE emerging from the SD-WAN, trying to now put even more on a box.
Yeah.
And I try and tell customers, you better be careful about buying in, what time you buy in to expect all those things to be working. You know, the story today will probably be a lot different than the story 2 years from now on what you can put together on those boxes from a particular vendor, or whether you have to have multiple vendors.
Yep.
You know, it's a vision right now, I think, more than a reality, that you can run all these security tools, and you can do SD-WAN, and you can do intent-based networking and zero trust network access. You know, the box that's going to solve all your problems. You know, the Swiss Army knife.
You know, one thing we recommend, you mentioned it, right, on the pendulum of this edge versus data centers, right?
Right.
One thing we recommend is you get a baseline. You get a baseline of your location's edge. What were the performances like? Can you go back, you know, 30 days, 60 days, and have a benchmark of how everything worked the way that it's working today, or if you haven't made any changes, right? So products like taps, packet brokers, active probes, any one of these technologies that you like to use, right? From us or otherwise, they help you baseline, because then you're not wondering, you're just making data-driven decision. Yes, I placed a new technology at all of our edge sites, and now I see the difference in performance. Now I can actually pinpoint where the improvements have to be, right? So we're seeing that too, where I think it's prudent that as you decentralize, you have to know where the baseline was. And dovetailing into another topic of edge, because it's kind of a topic that it's kind of fun in its own right, and yet it's kind of nascent, and that's probably why. Think of industries like agriculture, transport, large-scale distribution. These, we might call them edge sites. They're like pretty big. They may have like 2,000 people come in every day and work there, and they may have, you know, 1 million sensors in that building across the plants. That is something IT departments also have to actually secure, right? Make sure it works. So yeah, I think I kind of brought that together because for us, edge has like a whole new meaning, because edge could be quite big.
Yes, I mean, it sounds like you guys are in a pretty interesting area that is going to have a lot of challenges for customers trying to piece all this together. You guys, I know you have modeling tools and that. You guys kind of hedging into that whole digital twin world where, you know, you can monitor, you can try to model your network and then throw scenarios at it to see how it's going to reply. I know it's a very difficult task, if you could have lots and lots of inputs and networks and applications that are all very different. But how would you go about that, I guess, if you're going to start a project? Because I was talking to one of those, we just had our IT summit that we were part of, and that was one of the projects that they were taking on was, you know, this intent-based network, because now that everybody's working at home, they want their user to have, in order to keep employees, they want their user experience to be identical, whether they're at home, in the big campus, or wherever they are. And that seems like a big project to take on if you got thousands of applications and, you know, applications all over the place and users all over the place.
Yeah. So I think I can comment it something like this. In the past, right, you could build up a lab and have, let's say, certain types of software stacks, sometimes hardware, and kind of create an environment, right? Your digital twin, but it was in a lab. Right. But it was funded a certain way, because you expected that what you procured for that could roll out into production, right?
Right.
I think you nailed it on the head. Now the complexity of what you can call digital twin, good luck wrestling with what it is.
Right.
It's edge, it's mobile, it's Wi-Fi, it's cloud, it's applications, it's SaaS, it's SD-WAN emulation. So you quickly think about a lab, doesn't work that easily.
No.
Right? But it works nicely if you had solutions that could model that in a software stack. that had all the parameters that you can change as best possible, right? You're trying to, as a simple example, if you had a router that's modeled and you needed to have like a red buffer, well, software can model that like very accurately to the real router that would do this, right? And you can say, let me see, as I increase volume, how does this, where do I see packet drops? Can I have markings on traffic? And I can model that. So I think it was an evolutionary step because of the complexity of this IT domain and all the things that are in it. So the digital twin, it's a lovely name, but it has meaning because like it tries to uncomplicate things in the real world by simulating some of the big rock items, you know, on a digital scale, right? And so that's it kind of made sense because our pedigree is testing, measurement, making sure things work, and if in breaking it and then having our clients fix it. So digital twin kind of falls in line to that model.
Right. Yeah, it seems like you guys are in place for a lot of you have a lot of the tools people are going to need here to start heading down this intent-based networking world that's also secure at the same time. And sounds like it sounds, you know, you guys maybe you want to talk a little bit about where you see your future at Keysight going. You know, what are the challenges you guys see? How are you pulling this all together for a client?
Yeah, so I'm going to focus on network visibility because there's a variety of areas and maybe a little bit of cloud, and I'll see if I can touch on security. So a lot of different areas, but those three. On network visibility, what we see is data is actually key. So you look at the zero trust framework, data is in the middle, visualization, analytics, very key. You know, ML AI, it's just in its like infancy today. We'll all admit, right? Yes, yes. Some AI can play chess, but that's literally all it can do, right? It cannot say hi to you.
Fixed set of rules that it's just following. Yes,
correct. So and then you know what's most important to them, the AI, is the training, right? What's important to training is data, a lot of data, terabits and terabits and terabits of data. That's where we come in. So our goal is to actually be that hub for clients to help them get the right data, as much data from everywhere that they can that make sense, put it into their data lake so they can actually make whatever AI, ML, actionable insights they can get. You know, simple things like service providers may look at, you know, roaming, how are clients moving? Someone may look at it in the retail space. How long is someone connected? Where are they staying? What aisle are they at longer than the other? You know, things that are kind of amazing, but you know, it starts with data. So that's our focus, is network visibility, telemetry from the data point of view, because data tells you the truth. The rest is how you interpret it, right? The other one that I was going to mention is cloud and security. I'll kind of bundle it together. Especially around zero trust, which is every week, probably every day, there is a breach, right? Of different magnitude, right? It could be a small ransomware of $1 million, which is like the least you will ask for. You can ask for 10 million. You'll hold things hostage. This happens in the public sector, police department, education, healthcare. You know, just 2 or 3 weeks back, Optus, which is a service provider down in Australia, had so many of their records being pulled off right off of a server. No permissions were needed to pull that data down. Very straightforward hack, right? I mentioned that because where we see ourselves is trying to help clients there too. So you cannot possibly keep up with everything all the time. You just cannot. So our focus is on intent-based and automation. So we have solutions that help clients automate sort of like the security posture of your entire network on a continuous basis, instead of, you know, doing once a year pen testing. So it's an adjunct sort of complementary solution. So we see ourselves helping clients in that life cycle too, so that they can kind of stay on top of it without literally being hands-on with some of the technologies that are needed to actually confirm that you've got everything in place. You know, your MITRE ATT&CK framework is kind of intact, and we kind of lean on that to kind of test this out, right? So it's important. So we focus on that area as well. And the same is true for cloud, where we directionally, everything we do has to be operating sensibly in the cloud. So we don't lift and shift, because customers do that and then they regret it. So
Right.
we know that because we have so many clients that have done that journey. So we are also focused on cloud, because everything that is in the cloud, brand new workloads, containers, serverless architectures, you name it,
Right.
they build it first and then they secure it later. And unfortunately, that's the reality of it, right? If they could do it right from the onset. So our focus is also on developing solutions that help to actually secure it, even if it's greenfield or if it's kind of, out there and you got to secure it across all the different hybrid infrastructure, basically. So broadly speaking, those three areas is directionally where we're always headed, basically.
Great. Well, it sounds like the future will be bright, and it's gonna, these journeys, I've kind of learned a lesson, I think, over just the last things change a lot, but they don't change a lot. I think a lot of times we make a first step, like they've kind of have with AI, where a lot of that's based on like the Amazon model, where they're looking at data that already happened and saying, okay, you bought these 4 things and these other people bought these 4 things plus this.
Right.
And it's looking in the rearview mirror and taking data and making, say, and they don't have to be accurate that often either, because they've got 50 million users. If they just hit 1,000 of them, they sold 1,000 more things than they would have sold. And then we've taken that leap, and now said, I think they've kind of made AI try to look a little easier than it actually is. And you see these technology specific ones like Juniper with their Mist and things, where people are solving it for their particular platform,
Right.
which seems like a more solvable problem. But when he's talking about the whole ecosystem, it becomes, I think it's an exponential next step, not just a linear next step.
Yeah.
And it's going to take a lot longer than people think, I think, to really get that going.
Yes, like you can play chess, but you can't play checkers. I mean,
Exactly right.
It's easier. I don't know
Right.
the rules. So yes, I think all those things are true. It is very domain specific in terms of like what you can actually do with the data. So you have to take that initiatives, and customers they really are doing that because they get it. This is sort of their competitive edge. Data tells them a lot of things forward looking, like you said. Maybe in the past it was kind of rear view looking, right? Like Mr. Obvious, yes, that's what happened. But here the idea is not to boil the ocean, but just to get enough insight that you can stay ahead in the lane that you're in.
Right. No, that's a good strategy, because I think boiling the ocean is going to lead to a lot of frustration, kind of like those ERP systems that people are deploying for 10 years, a decade, that never really did everything they needed to do at the time, right? They're going to consolidate everything, and 10 years later, they're still working on it. So
yes, I can think of a few.
Yes.
So I got a question for both of you, since just from your perspective, if you think about the way that, our current economic conditions, whether you think we're in a recession or going into a recession, what are you hearing from our customers, and how are they reacting to this? And I ask that because the technology sector usually will correct a little bit earlier. We'll go into that correction just because of the way that things trade, and we'll generally come out of it a little bit earlier too. So it's a good early indicator of what's happening. But the truth really always goes down to, what are the customers saying? Like, how are they preparing for what's ahead? What are you guys hearing out there?
Well, this is a loaded question, Chris. So I'm going to try to unload it without getting in any hot water anywhere. I think that we're seeing what others see, which is the inflationary pressures. We sell a lot of software. We sell a lot of businesses, also hardware. We have supply chain challenges, right? But they have gotten better over the last year, right? So I think that what customers telegraph is that the demand for 3 areas that we really are just looking at macro, right? Which is optimization of IT processes, right? You mentioned IT ops. I believe there's funding there. We're not seeing necessarily anything soft in the cybersecurity domain, except for obviously talent, as everyone's aware that this is a real struggle. And I think in some cases, customers are thinking of using tools instead of people, kind of just to lean on that a little bit longer. So that's what the telegraph that we get from customers is the funding is there, but it has to be very prudent on how it's spent, because it has to be deliberate to something, like I said, that has to kind of stay on point on cost. As I mentioned earlier, the cloud costs have skyrocketed. So does that imply anything too dramatic? I don't think so. I think the cloud investments are going to continue to grow. It just means that they'll be more prudent about making sure there's best usage out of it, you know? So that's my long answer about the economic forecast. On the question of recession, they don't, how about this, Chris? They don't last very long historically. From the 1930s to now, statistically speaking, they're not very long. And everyone can hope for that, right?
And it seems to be accelerating. These up and down trends seem to go much faster than they used to. I would also say what we're seeing is, customers are, and I was wondering when this was going to happen, is, you know, they've been, this OpEx model is really great for the vendors like Microsoft and all that, but after a while you start piling on enough OpEx and the companies are like, whoa, you know, OpEx can't be controlled as much as CapEx can be if say the economy is a little slow. So I was wondering when we're starting to see that crack a little bit, where people are like, is there ways I can capitalize some of this stuff and not have to make it a recurring cost in my bottom line every quarter? And because it's getting bigger and bigger, right? When it's okay when few of them capitalize or become operational expenses, but as every one of your solutions becomes an operational expense, that's not always an ideal world either to be in. So I'm starting to see the break point there. I've seen customers getting creative a little bit on, you know, if they can sometimes define some of these things as capital items, depending upon how they're deployed. They're looking at, you know, especially like manufacturing where the, you know, budgets are tight. They don't, all this operational expenses and always that's not what they're looking for.
Yeah.
So, I see that going on. I think security, we haven't really seen any slowdown yet. And I'm always watching that myself, right? It's be curious to see when we get into next year, when we're on to next year's budgets, right? Because right now we're still kind of working on last year's budgets. People had budgeted things last year. I think like being smart, like the tools that'll provide visibility, create economics, I think will keep going, because in the digital transformation, people can't stop. They may not have a business if they stop right now transforming their company. It can easily be offset. So it's an interesting thing. We'll see how it all plays out, and data will help with that. So
it will, certainly will.
Cool. Anything else you guys want to add to this before we close it out?
No, thanks for having me on, guys. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it was good insight, good answers. I always really appreciate doing these. I get a lot out of them, and it keeps us on top of the on top of what's going on out there, especially you guys, because you guys are involved in so many pieces of the puzzle. You're in the middle of collecting that data. The one last one I just wanted to ask is that home network. Do you guys put an agent on home computers, or how do you collect data to see what's going on when you have these users that are, you could have 10,000 users working from home? How do you go about figuring out if they're getting a good experience or not?
Yeah, we for clients that do, we do samples of that data. Or we tap data that's actually at an edge location where users kind of come back in. So you're right, we don't go wide on that, because really statistically you're not going to probably find something very significant unless you look at the specific last mile issues, right? Your Wi-Fi network, your ISP link is not the same as even 3 streets down from you, right? So it is statistically, like, it can be ignored, because unless you knew it down to every person's last mile, you weren't going to be able to draw much conclusion, except if you knew that from this ISP you were having problems. So we kind of try to focus on one level above that.
Solve the problem you can actually solve, because you don't want to be solving every home user's network problems. That's way too far reaching. So you're saying solve that problem one level up at an aggregate scale, and that's what I was looking for. It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, for what we can control, yes.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
Great.
All right, great. Well, Taran, thanks for your time today. That was another episode of IT Trendsetters.
Thanks, Taran. It was a lot of fun. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
All right, great meeting you.